Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested, and well, today's the day. Bambu Lab, the makers of the X line, the P line, and the A line of 3D printers that we've used these past couple of years and have really kind of taken over the market, is today announcing their newest generation, their new flagship that's been long anticipated, and it's right here. We've been testing the H2D for the past couple weeks. They've really telegraphed what this printer was going to be. There have been leaks. They've pre-announced a bunch of things. But today I want to go over all the new features, and there are some surprises here as well. Our experience using this printer and what you should consider if you're in the market, if you're either upgrading from an A-level printer or looking into getting a new large format filament printer, what you want to consider before looking at the H2D. The biggest thing that we've learned in using the Bambu Lab printers is they've really kind of modernized and turned 3D printing into more of a set it and forget it, press and go hobby than we've ever experienced in the past. What was so revolutionary when we first used those X series printers was how easy it was to slice a model, press print, not even have to pull filament from the nozzle to clean it to start, and just let it go. You can really press a button, set it, and forget it. And printers from all other companies, from Prusa, from Creality, from Elegoo, have really adopted some of those features for high-speed, easy printing. But the thing that we've always wanted from, number one thing we've wanted from Bambu printers is, well, a larger build volume. And that's the number one feature of the H2D. So whereas the X line and the A line, the P line maxed out at 256 millimeters cubed, that's about 10.5 inches in each dimension, the H2D now expands to basically over 12 inches, almost 12 inches cubed. If you look here, it says the whole build volume is 350 by 320 by 325. It's not exactly 350 millimeters all the way across, because that's actually spread across two nozzles, and we'll talk about those two hot ends in a minute. But basically, you can think of this as having a build volume of 325 millimeters in the x-axis, 320 millimeters in the y-axis, and up to 325 millimeters on that z-axis. In practical terms, that means that we're now printing at life-size human scale, not just trinkets and hand props and small things that you can hold, but things you can wear. And so this is the biggest thing that we were able to print on the H2D. This actually slightly oversized Mercury space helmet maximized that build volume, something that you can actually comfortably put on, and something that wasn't possible on a printer that printed this fast, or a printer that prints in this style of Core XY 3D printing. I printed not only this helmet, but also Adam's head. So again, we're talking about human scale, and this is printed at, I believe, 0.16 millimeter layer height. Details look great. This is about a day and a half of printing, and now not only things that are human face scale, mass scale, but helmet scale. It changes for people who might be cosplayers or people printing large R2D2s, what you can get out of a machine when you have a build plate that isn't this big, but a build plate that is this big. This is the new standard build plate that comes with the H2D. And having been using this as our primary go-to printer for the past couple weeks, going back to my A1 and my X1 and this build plate, this feels relatively small. I mean, that's surprising. 2 years ago, I would have thought this was plenty, but it turns out I can and do want more. So if you're looking for a bigger volume, if that 12.5 inch size is going to be right for you, like, this is a great option, I think, for that. In addition to just the build volume, it's not easy just to scale the size of the machine up. And it is a big machine. This is 68 pounds, not including like the AMS sitting on top of it. They did kind of reinforce a lot of the internal design of this. So you look at the inside, it has like a lot of similar characteristics as the X line of printers. There are extra windows on the sides now that you can see. There's a massive blower on the front and exhaust on the back. And I can see a lot of like just structural improvements and niceties and iterative things that they've done here. For example, on the X line of printers, the X-axis moved along 2 carbon rails. Here, that's replaced with a linear rail that's going to be looks a little more structurally sound. The belts on that core XY design that move this along the XY axis now are a little bit thicker. They look like a centimeter tall, 10 millimeters. So again, getting this to move at incredibly fast and reliable speeds match with the throughput of those hot ends. There's a bunch of calibration, of course, that you can do on this printer for that reliability, and it's inherited some of the noise dampening and noise kind of motor compensating calibration options that were introduced first with the A line of printers. And so not only does this operate relatively quietly compared to the X line of printers, the accuracy is pretty good. In fact, there's an extra level of precision that you can get if you pick up this optional vision encoder plate, slap this in here, and there's a high resolution 1080 camera on the side of the extruder that then scans all these tiny QR codes to give you extra degrees of accuracy if you really need to make those parts for engineering. We did some test prints and measuring these prints, these 3D models, the holes and these circles, the diameters are almost exactly to the digital models themselves, printed just in PLA CF. So pretty impressive if you're prototyping with this type of printer. Now, in addition to your standard PLA, of course, this printer has a heated chamber here, and it's enclosed system, so you can print your ABS, PTG, TPU even. And something that's been improved to facilitate some of that is the new AMS, the automatic material system. We really like the AMS from the first line printers and even the version of the AMS that was with the A line of printers, because for me, it was an easy way to switch between different filament colors. Like, yes, you could swap between the filaments and do multi-material printing, but for me, it was having my favorite colors loaded up and an easy way to send in a marble color print or a matte print and having these nice single color prints come out. But one of the issues with the first AMS was it wasn't a place that you can dry your filaments. Keeping your filament dry is really important for print quality, especially with those more novel materials. You could previously put a spool inside and have the heat bed heat up and then dry it in there. But now the AMS2 has an actual heater built in that goes up to 65 degrees Celsius, and more importantly, has ports on the back and the bottom to move air through it. It's not just about keeping it in a warm environment with the moisture sensor now built in, but it's about moving the air through it. So you can set this in a drying mode, and then you detach it from the ports, and then kind of set it for however many hours you want, and then it will actually spin the spools and get it to like under 10% humidity. If you need additional drying, they're also going to be selling an AMS HT, a high temperature version. That's a single spool version, and that one will go up to 85 degrees and maybe more ideal for things like TPU 90, where you really, really want it dry to have those successful prints. But the thing that the AMS2 seems to be the most beneficial for is now multicolor prints, because there are now two extruders. This is a two extruder system. We've seen dual extrusion systems before. We've seen systems where they actually have multiple heads that get swapped, like Prusa's XL printer. But the two extruder system here works particularly interestingly and well. One, they're the exact same extruders, so go up to 350 degrees Celsius on either side, but you'll notice that they're actually offset on their z-axis. So, after you slice your file, if you've assigned the filaments to the extruders, and they'll even in the Bambu slicer help you with that assignment to minimize the number of flushes and filament waste, it'll actually first calibrate the two hot ends with a tiny calibration code in the back there to make sure they're perfectly level, that these two hot ends, even as they shift between Z heights, they are actually, the print layers are going to be perfectly aligned, even if you're printing multicolor on this, if you're printing an image on a single flat surface. as well. So that's been working really well. They are swappable, so they adopt the hot end switching mechanism that the A1 uses. They look very similar, although the ones for the H2D are specifically made for this temperature, and so they're not exactly swappable with the A line of printers. But they will sell, your 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, and 0.8 diameter hot ends. Standard is 0.4 millimeters here. You do still have your standard poop chute in the back, so the wasted flush filament comes out the back. There are vents in the back now, and then one spool holder on the side, although you can mount a second spool holder underneath it for 2 external spools or an extra large spool. 2 inlets in the back for feeding from your AMS or from an external spool, and you can have those swap between your left and right extruders. Like with the previous printers, you can also daisy chain the AMS printers, so you can have them up to 4 of these, plus a few of the high temperature ones for, I believe, up to 25 total spools that you can go multi-material between. That's not something we've tested, but even going between the 5 different spools, 1 on the external and 4 here, we've had a lot of interesting and fun results trying out multicolor, multi-material printing. So let's go sit down and take a look at some of those multi-material prints and talk about why you want to print in different colors. So let's talk about multi-material printing and how it's worked in the past. When we did the first earliest days of multicolor printing, the models were actually, the way the slicer thinks of the different colors, for example, this panda here, is it would treat each color like its own 3D model. So it would send the G-code, the movements for the one color, to the system and say that, well, at this layer, let's stop and let's actually flush and switch the filament and then change and then slice this other model and print this other model that's the other color, kind of melding them together. In the Bambu Slicer software, Bambu Studio software, you can actually do things like paint the models. You can use a paintbrush, you can use a paint bucket, kind of your Photoshop tools, and say for this surface or for this layer, please color it a different color. And in the past, printing with multicolor has been possible, especially with these AMS systems, but has been pretty wasteful because between your nozzle changes, between your color changes, you're going to have to, one, have that additional time to pull back, retract the filament, flush the excess filament that's in the system, load in the color change, and then you're going to have to then also wipe on what's called a prime tower to make sure it's then printing smoothly, and then continue the print. So if you're printing like a single model, that's actually, you can have many, many times the amount of times it would take to print that one model just to get it in multicolor, and you sometimes get a ton of this extra wasted filament. That's why the best way to print multicolor is actually batch print, so that per layer, you're getting actually the same swaps and you're printing across, a dozen different objects as opposed to one object at once. By introducing a second nozzle, and that's maybe locked to a single color, you don't have to switch nearly as much. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, if I'm printing 2 colors, that makes sense. So a simple 2-color model like this came as a single color, but in the Studio software, I painted the different joints a different color, and then loaded 1 color in the AMS and 1 color in the external spool. So no actual switching needed. When it was no flushing needed. When it would go from the black to the yellow, it would just know that, okay, now it's time to go to the spool that's already loaded on the other hot end and start printing in that. Adds a little bit of time compared to the single color, but much faster than if you're on a single nozzle. So having a lot of fun already printing 2-color objects. And then you can mix and match. So even with the same model, you can highlight different parts of it to be a different color, and you're not doing any additional flushes because the spools are already loaded. What happens when you introduce a 3rd color? And this is where on paper I'm thinking, okay, Adding a third color means that I, at some point, have to be flushing. I have to be swapping. And I was worried that there wouldn't be that big of a time savings. So it turns out, in some cases, in most cases, what I tested, the time savings are really consistent. You do get a bunch of savings. For example, here's a model that's 3 colors. There's a color for the toes, a color for the body, and a color for the eyes. The number of actual spool swaps needed for two extruder system here is 1, just once. And that's because it had the black color, which is the majority of this body, in the external spool. And in the AMS, I had the white and the green. And you notice in this model, the white, as it's printed, print in place, the white and the green actually never occupy the same layer, the same Z height. So it loads that white in first, and it's printing white and black just up to a point, and when it gets to a point where it needs the green, it then flushes the white and then loads in the green, and it's never going back to a different color. So the way the models are designed, you can have something that looks like it's painted, like it's much more interesting of an object, but not actually require a ton of swaps. And just having that one extra extruder really saves, in this case, saved like 45 different swaps. Something like this Pikachu, it's actually 4 colors. So you got brown, which is for the back here. There's, of course, the yellow, there's the red, and then there's the black, and then there's the white. It's actually, sorry, this is a full 5-color print here. This also a massive savings just using that yellow as your external spool on all these other colors in the AMS. And that's, again, due to the fact of the way this is designed, the black and the red never occupy the same layers. The brown, the red, the black, and the white, the brown stays on its own layers along with that yellow. And at the end, it's mostly the black here. So the only time it's only printing like when a layer needing 3 colors is by the white of the eyes, where it needs white, black, and yellow. In that case, you're adding a few more flushes there. So a print like this flushed a total of 14 times, and the slicer will even tell me it saved 81 grams of flushing and saved a whopping 200 swaps, spool swaps, compared to a single extruder. I couldn't comprehend that when thinking about a 5-color object. So I was thinking, okay, 5 colors, two extruders, sure, a little bit of time savings, but it's actually a massive time savings. And then you multiply that across printing like 25 of these all at once in 20 hours, less than 1 hour each, you can have 24 of these little Pikachus for your kids' friends, a whole classroom full of kids. So for people who are making items to sell on Etsy, to sell at farmers markets, this is actually massive time savings and material savings when making these just ready to go objects. That's this 2 extruder system, that's a massive, massive improvement. So just those 2 things, the bigger build volume, having a 2 extruder system makes this a pretty big upgrade. But there's also the elephant in the room that we gotta talk about, because over the past couple months, there has been a little bit of controversy with the way Bambu has updated their terms of service and a latest firmware update to some of its previous model printers. If you haven't been following this, what happened was there was a firmware update that now requires that if you want to use a third-party slicer, if you don't want to use Bambu Studio, if you want to use something like Orca Slicer, you have to also install additional piece of software called Bambu Connect. Bambu Connect works for Windows and Mac. There's actually no Linux version just yet. And then the third-party slicers basically became incompatible. You weren't able to use them to directly control the printer. You still can't directly control the printer, but you can use them to then send a file to Bambu Connect, which then can interface with Bambu's cloud service to send a print file to the printers. Now, effectively, for the vast majority of people, it might not affect their day-to-day use. If you just use Bambu Studio on your computer, use Bambu Handy on your phone, it's not going to change how you print. But there are a lot of people who are running print farms for manufacturing, and there are a lot of additional third-party pieces of hardware and software that the Bambu ecosystem previously easily supported. There is a Home Assistant, an IoT front end that you can connect a bunch of printers to automate and do remote management. That actually doesn't work with Bambu Connect right now. And if you want to not use their cloud service and not want to use Bambu Connect, you can turn on a LAN mode. The H2D actually doesn't have an Ethernet port. That's still limited to the X1E. There is a USB port for file transfer, and there's not even a micro SD card slot anymore. You would have to go to LAN mode over Wi-Fi and over your local air network. You can then send prints, but then you lose like remote print monitoring if you're away from home. You can't use the Bambu Handy software. Again, for most people buying their printers, it's not going to affect the actual day-to-day use, but there are a lot of people out there who are running those print farms who had built systems in place using Home Assistant, using Orca Slicer and other third-party slicers to work with their print farms, and they had to change their workflows. It's not necessarily breaking their ability to manufacture. The bigger issue is that moving line, that moving terms of service. The firmware isn't even mandated. You can roll it back and you can not update your printers. But the fear is over time, Bambu might change the policies to cross a line that may affect more people and be something that we're not comfortable with. They haven't crossed that line just yet, and we'll be the first to let you know when they've changed their policies to a point where we're not comfortable using their printers anymore. But the fact that the policies have changed is something that you should be aware of in case that affects your purchase and decision making. Now, there is one more thing, because we talked about volume, we talked about the dual extrusion system, all these other improvements, AMS2 Pro, AMS hot temperature. The H2D also isn't just a 3D printer anymore. That's right. The H2D also can work as a laser cutter and plotter, because there is an H2D laser edition, which we've been also using. Let's take a look. So this is the Bambu Labs H2D laser edition. It's a separate unit, so a separate SKU. The standard H2D goes up to $2,200 with the AMS2 Pro, and for $600 more, you can get the laser edition that comes with a few different internal components, as you can already see, as well as 2 accessories that allow it to act as a cutter or a plotter, as well as a laser cutter in this same build area and space. So let's go over some of the internal changes here, because Bambu Lab has also come out to say that there will be an upgrade path if you have the standard H2D to turn it into the laser edition. But I think it's gonna be a little more complicated than just swapping out some panels. So the door and the window, of course, are now tinted to protect you from the laser diode, that blue light. It is still an enclosed system. There are sensors on the inside for smoke and fire, as well as a new, what they call a bird's eye camera system on the inside here that looks over the entire build area and cutting area. That's also to scan for your materials, as Bambu will be selling their own materials to cut and laser cut on, as well as to overlay your graphics, your SVG files, your vectors, or your engravings onto the material itself, kind of like what the Glowforge does. Other than that, there's also a air assist here, so an extra ventilation system. The top flap pops open, so air comes into the top and gets pushed out the rear here. For that upgrade, I think it'll be a separate unit in the back. And ventilation is all important if you're going to be doing any type of laser cutting. And so they will be also selling a air purification system that can plug into the exhaust, has filters in here. Again, very similar to the air purification system that Glowforge sells. I want to run you through a little bit of how this device swaps between the different modes. We're going to be diving into this way deeper later on, as there's a lot more testing to do with the 10-watt laser and even the 40-watt laser accessory that they'll be selling later. But what's kind of neat is that you don't actually have to remove any of the hot ends or extruders here to get it to work as a cutter or a laser cutter. You remove this panel, and you can see that there are two rails here, and you basically take the unit, plug it into or slide it down the rails, lock it in place, and at this point, the system already knows that you've plugged in an accessory and it's already popped up. And there is a module connector for power, and so that gets plugged in to the back. And once you do that, then the system actually has to calibrate for whichever mode you're going to be using it in. It's a little bit of a process to go from 3D printing to plotting to laser cutting. You have to run that calibration every time. And initially, you have to run a bird's eye calibration as well to calibrate for your particular build area here. But this is something that I could see someone, after doing a bunch of 3D printing, if they needed to cut a bunch of vinyl labels or, laser cut some plaques for something they're selling, to be able to do that in an all-in-one system. So that's the cutter, which is a nice small unit. There's a blade, of course, here. It's kind of akin to, the Cricut style of cutters. And so I did some test cutting on some vinyl with different degrees, different sizes of objects, and it cuts pretty well. You can also attach a plotter, a pen mounting accessory. So if you want to use it to draw, you can use that to draw as well. But I think for cutting, it does its job. And there's a new piece of software that you use for both cutting and the laser cutting that's called Bambu Suite. It's PC only at the moment, and it recognizes materials, allows you to import all different types of designs, even has the ability to do designing in the software itself. If you want to draw your primitives, if you want to make curved edges, combine shapes, things like that. Pretty robust. It's like all the stuff you would need to create an outline around a graphic that you want to engrave and have that cut out of. It's all there without having to send it and be processed in the cloud. You are limited to a smaller workspace when you're cutting on here, so it's a little bit smaller width-wise than your full 12 inches. And of course, you can't feed a continuous roll. So we use the Cricut style cutters here, which are about 12 inches wide, but you can feed in much longer, 24 inches worth of material to cut large vinyl objects. Here, you're limited to under 12 by 12. To use the laser, it's similar. It's a different module, but similar system. You can slot this in, clasp it in, and plug it in. And then there's additional port for airflow on the top to cool the laser. And so you have an additional tube that gets plugged in to the top here. System recognizes itself. It is a class 4 laser. The whole system, I guess, technically operates under class 1, which still means that this needs to be enclosed, needs to have all the right sensors. And I'm kind of surprised that Bambu didn't include a pair of protective glasses to operate with this. They're kind of trusting that everyone follows and obeys the proper procedures when using this as a laser cutter. You also have to install an e-stop if you want to use this as a laser cutter. So a button here to immediately power down. It's tied to the safety key that you would have in the back for all the standard units. And with a 10-watt laser, you can cut acrylic, you can cut what's a blue diode, so you can cut dark, opaque acrylic specifically. Can't cut through clear acrylics or blue translucent acrylics. There, you can cut through plywood's thin walnut veneer, and Bambu is going to be selling a bunch of their own materials as well. Before laser cutting, you use their crumb tray. So this whole thing gets slotted in the back, and there's a tracking marker for calibration here for that. So that's how this gets aligned. You can move these rails between the different slots, depending on what size of material you want to put in here. But if you're putting in, for example, here's 3mm acrylic, or a 3mm piece of their like maple ply, it's basically about a foot by a foot is your workable space. 3mm is the sweet spot for materials here for that 10-watt laser for acrylics to cut through. It's about 2 passes to cut through. But what I found is because it's using the Core XY system for its XY movements, that's one of the reasons it can 3D print so fast. Engraving and drawing lines on here using the laser is incredibly fast. I was really impressed. It goes, I believe, 400 millimeters per second in terms of its movement. So just as fast as if you were 3D printing, but here now moving the laser. The camera that you use for remote monitoring sends a feed out to the display. So when you're cutting, you get to see that laser in operation, and your cuts happen compared to like a Glowforge. If you're just cutting that 3 millimeter thick material, it actually is pretty comparable to like the Glowforge standard basic and much faster than the Glowforge Aura. Like I said, there's going to be a 40-watt laser version, that a module that they're going to be selling. So we'll want to do additional testing on the improved speed and the maximum 15 millimeters of thickness that you can cut with that. But regardless of those specs, it's fundamentally a different type of operation that you'll be doing. And we've used cutters, like Cricut cutters in the past. We've used a bunch of laser cutters in the past, and we've done 3D printing in the past. You know, I never really imagined a world where in the same machine, I would be doing 3D printing and laser cutting, obviously not at the same time, but in that same volume and space. And while that seems like an incredible feat of engineering, and it is, to get that all working and to get it pretty seamless, when you have all the safety mechanisms attached, safety becomes a concern for me. Because as we talked about in the beginning of this video, one of the things that Bambu did so well with their 3D printers were made these devices that you could set and forget, that you could run overnight 3D prints, multi-day, multi-color 3D prints at a push of a button, when fundamentally a lasering operation is an operation where you have to be in the same room monitoring the machine just in case. And Bambu recommends and of course wants you to do so with all the prerequisite warnings, but I'm afraid that there are going to be people who buy this machine potentially who might not know that, or might be a little careless if they think about this as a machine that's just going to be in their home office running 3D prints and not realize that you have to be here monitoring and making sure that the laser cuts are operating safely, because you're at risk of setting a fire. For example, the material that Bambu sells has this coating here. It's a coating that we've seen, this kind of plastic protection layer, and they recommend people remove it because I think the adhesive for this layer on top of the acrylic is really stinky when cut. And when we've been cutting with our Glowforge, for example, it's been calibrated such that we want that coating, we want that layer on top of our woods so that the woods don't char. Here, Bambu isn't selling any material with that coating. They're just gonna let your engraves char, because I don't think they want these machines to have that kind of melted adhesive gunk in the space. My fear over time is that you're gonna get clogs in the belt drives. You're gonna get smelliness in these systems if you're running them for any long extended duration as a laser cutter and then switching over to 3D prints. Even in our testing these past couple of weeks, you know, I've noticed that some of our 3D prints that come out after we've been laser cutting have that laser cutting smell. Anyone who's run a laser cutter, even with proper ventilation, you know, the room kind of, you smell that it's been used for laser cutting. And to have those operations live in the same machine, kind of side by side, is a strange new world. It's all this to say that it's a really impressive feat of engineering, the H2D. They did the things that we wanted them to do, having a larger build volume, putting 2 extruders in there, adding the option for this laser cutting and the plotting and the vinyl cutting is this extra feature set that I feel like Bambu wants to put in here because they can, right? They're so far ahead of that competition. It reminds me, there's this old Chinese parable about a snake, a snake with legs. You can Google this, you can find it. And it's about an artist who's in an art competition painting snakes, painted a snake so fast, looked around, he was so far ahead that he added legs to a snake and he lost the competition because snakes don't have legs. Now, if you're not familiar with it, maybe I'm just talking to the folks over at Bambu. You guys kind of put legs on a snake here. Like, Did this machine really need to have laser cutting functionality? Probably not. Is it cool that it does? Yeah, but they're gonna have to live with how their users operate this as well. We're gonna do some follow-up videos, testing these more in depth, doing more printing, doing more laser cutting, testing that 40-watt laser. It's a lot to go over. We'll be doing more about using this machine in the future. If you have questions about the H2D, if you have experience using laser cutters, using machines that can do all different types of operations, please post them in the comments below. But until then, happy printing, happy laser cutting now, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for watching, and I have a question for you. Who doesn't love stickers? Nobody doesn't love stickers, that's who. And that's why at Tested we have released this mega sticker pack full of 11 of our favorite stickers, and you can buy it right now to adorn your toolbox, your notebooks, whatever you want at tested-store.com.